Hello and welcome to the season premiere of VU Sports Wire 2017. I'm Cutler Klein alongside Max Schneider, Drew Sundaram. Thank you so much as always for tuning in. Welcome back for another great season of Vanderbilt Sports Talk, the hottest debate on Vanderbilt sports in Nashville. Tonight, we've got a great show for you talking about the MTSU victory last week. Quite the handy victory, if I do say so myself. Taking on Alabama A&M this weekend. We'll talk about Vanderbilt's chances in the SEC East, as well as their winnable and probably unwinnable games going forward this season. An exciting time to be a Vanderbilt football fan indeed. But first, we got to get into the big victory from Saturday night. Vanderbilt beating MTSU 28-6 at Floyd Stadium in Murfreesboro. We've got the highlights for you, so let's roll them. First quarter here, Kyle Shermer leading a strong drive down the field. Throws it all the way towards the end zone where Kalijah Lipscomb's right there to haul in that pass. A little underthrown though, but really who's watching? Touchdown, Commodores take a 7-0 lead early on in the first quarter. Wobbly pass there too, but Kalijah Lipscomb really going for it. Able to come down with the catch. Kyle Shermer was phenomenal on that drive, as was the entire offense to start this game. Later on, up 14-0. Shermer, perfectly placed ball to Kalijah Lipscomb in the corner of the end zone on 3rd and goal. Vanderbilt taking a 21-0 lead.
Lipscomb's got a great nose for the ball there by the goal line. We saw it last year, a couple games early in the season, picking up right where he left off. Looks poised for a good sophomore year.
Third quarter now. Kyle Shermer, dump off to Ralph Webb, and the Webb jet just takes it all the way down the field, 73 yards to the house. And Vanderbilt did not look back from there, giving up a touchdown in the final half of the game. Final score of that one, 28-6 Commodores. Guys, what stood out to you the most about that win? Because there was just so much to digest. We had high expectations for this team coming into the season. But what stood out to you about that game for the Commodores?
So, to me, there was a lot of positive takeaways. I mean, we just watched the highlight reels. There's a lot of really, really good things about that game. But I hate to be a little bit of a downer here. I want to focus on the run game. And yes, we saw that 73-yard reception from Ralph Webb, but that was a pass. And if you look at the rest of the stats from the run game, it was 35 rushes, 71 yards. That's barely 2 yards a rush. And that number looks even worse when you look at their numbers last year when they completely gashed MTSU for 231 rushing yards at 5 yards a clip. And again, sure, Shermer looked really good this game, but a lot of his passes were really controlled, and I think that was more of a game call type of thing. So when you're looking at these rushes, a lot of them had problem areas when it came to the O-line. And there's a lot of missed blocks, a lot of missed opportunities. And this is an area that Vandy really has to shore up when it comes to the rest of the season. Because, again, they're playing MTSU, and they had a real struggle on the ground. And this is a type of run game that's going to have to help them shore up their offense and help them maintain leads and help them establish consistency later in the year when they're playing really good defenses. And you did see some really good screen passes that demonstrate how athletic and how capable the O-line can be. But you just have to shore up the actual basics before you can get down to tougher games to end the season.
Yeah, first I'm going to push back a little on the run game. I think a little bit of that was the play calling. They really wanted to open the pass early. They jumped out to such a big lead with the pass that they figured why not keep throwing it. And by the second half, they just went completely conservative. I mean, they were telegraphing everything. It was obviously going to be a run on almost every play. MTSU stacked the box. MTSU really stacked the box the entire game. They weren't about to get burned by Webb again, at least in the run game. And they really had 8 guys in the box for a large part of the first half, which is what allowed Shermer to have so much success. I mean, of course, you talk about this offensive line, a couple new guys on the right side, but I wouldn't push the panic button yet on the run game. I still think this is by far the strongest aspect of their team. But my takeaway from this weekend is it's got to be the defense. I mean, 28-6, half of that is the 6 points that MTSU put up. Last year, this team put up 24 points against Vanderbilt in week 2. This is a potent offense. Brent Stockstill, one of the best quarterbacks in college football, really. I know he's a Conference USA quarterback. He's extremely accurate. He's mobile. And Richie James is one of the best receivers in college football. You mean, Derek Mason said it before this game, really coming into this game, how great those 2 players were. And Vanderbilt really held them in check. They blitzed Stockstill a ton, got a lot of pressure, particularly Charles Wright, who I thought was excellent filling the void that Burks left when Burks went to take over for Cunningham in the middle. And I think you saw a great day out of Charles Wright. 2 sacks, another tackle for loss. So it's really this defense that put it all together, and especially in the pass game. I mean, Richie James, he has a stat line of 10 catches for 112 yards. And yeah, that's a great stat line on the surface, but halfway through the fourth quarter, he had 6 grabs for 39 yards. It was really all garbage time. So you saw some great play out of the corners. Bryce Lewis had an interception. Juwan Williams, I think you saw some things to come this year. He's a tall, lanky corner that's really going to be able to handle some of these big receivers in the SEC. So I loved what I saw on all levels of the defense this weekend. And if that's a sign to come, we're going to see good things against tough offenses.
Something really interesting about that is when you're looking at the play call for Vandy early on in the game, you wonder if this is a trend you're going to see the rest of the year. Because Shermer really had one bomb, and that was a pass that was severely underthrown. And we saw that in many corners in the SEC. You're going to be able to catch up and break up that pass. But a lot of it was really short drops, a lot of quick slants, a lot of just really short ends, and a lot of it was yards and run after the catch by a lot of these receivers. And you almost start to wonder if that's the touted quarterback-receiver connection that everyone was talking about going into the year. So that's something to look forward to in other games if this play calling is going to play towards Shermer's strengths.
And Vanderbilt's going to get Caleb Scott back at some point in the next couple of weeks as well. He's been dealing with some nagging injuries, according to Coach Mason. I mean, to your point about the run game, yeah, they weren't great, but the thing is they didn't need to be. And I think that's a good sign for the Commodores that when one dimension of the offense, of course the offense wants to be multidimensional. Every single offense wants to have that perfect balance of run and pass. You open up the play, you run the ball, open up the play action, allow the passing to come through like that. But when you have a prolific running back that gets shut down like that, it's great to have such a phenomenal quarterback back there to be able to keep it up and be able to throw the ball there. And I think that's really the point of the game, is that they didn't need Ralph Webb to be great, and I think that's the mark of an offense that has definitely improved over the last few weeks. One guy I also wanted to point out, Jared Pinkney, absolutely truck-sticked one of the MTSU defenders. I mean, as you were talking about, how great is it to see Shermer have such rapport with these wide receivers, because they're all, most of them are upperclassmen except for Kalijah Lipscomb, but these are guys that are veterans. These are guys that have played with Shermer for a while. It's about time that they've had this kind of chemistry, right?
Yeah, it's great. And the big thing about offense coming into this year was the turnover that they had from last year. Every receiving option he has is back. And you talk about Pinkney. Pinkney didn't get so much time at tight end. He started to come on towards the end of the year, and he was fantastic in the first half of this game. Of course, they held him out for the second half because they really saw how much value he was bringing and didn't want to risk injury after he injured his ankle. But you saw all these wide receiver weapons, more from Lipscomb. Duncan, their leading receiver last year, he's back. Sherfield really started to develop a rapport with Shermer towards the end of last season. And we didn't even see Caleb Scott, who I believe has the best hands on this team. We saw him make some great catches last year, in particular against Auburn and Georgia. So you look at the wide receivers that Shermer has to throw to, and he's got to love what he's looking at. I mean, every play he has competent wide receivers, tight ends. Ralph Webb is a fantastic pass catcher out of the backfield. So Vanderbilt really has the offensive weapons to contend this year if Shermer can put it all together, and he looks like he has, if judging by game one.
I remember us on this show last year after the Tennessee game and how excited we were because we saw that standout performance by Shermer. And we were all wondering, is this just a one-hit wonder? Is this something that's going to get sustained into next season? And we really saw the play calling show off the fact that he's got this arm, he's got this chemistry. So they're just easing him into this role as like a really, really good, just like pro-style quarterback. And let's see where it goes.
The interesting thing, before we move into some SEC East talk, the interesting thing that I saw out of Coach Mason's press conference this week ahead of the Alabama A&M game is that for the majority of the time, he harped on a lot of the things that this team can improve upon. I mean, there's a 28-6 victory is not something you exactly say, yeah, we could have done a lot better, but that's exactly what Coach Mason was saying. He gave the special teams a C- because, Tommy Openshaw did miss a field goal, and they didn't really do anything incredibly special out there. He was saying they had to run block better for Ralph Webb. He was saying they have to be better on the defensive end in some certain areas, the nitty-gritty areas. Is that the mark of a program that's really turned the corner and really matured in that they're not sitting around on their laurels on a 28-6 win? They're not satisfied with that, and they want even more than that. Is that the real mark of just how far this program has come?
Well, I think that's the attitude that Vandy almost has to have, because when you're looking at their record last season, and this is something we're going to get into later in the show, but they did lose so many of those close games. And when you have the talent that Vandy does, and you're always on the cusp of being a really good team, you can't get into the mentality where you think you're better than you are, because that's what's dangerous, and that's what can cause you to lose games and to lose close games and to let things slip. So I think this is the exact mentality that Vandy as a team needs to have.
Yeah, and Derek Mason's confident, and that's no secret, but he wants to make sure they're not overconfident. And that's what he's been harping on day in and day out in practice. We want to go 1-0. We want to win this week. And if they can continue to do that, then they'll have success down the stretch. He knows that this is the best team he's had in a while, and he just doesn't want to look forward and make sure this team is focused on games later. He wants to be focused on then and now, and each week, one at a time.
Vanderbilt taking on Alabama A&M this Saturday, 3 p.m. at Vanderbilt Stadium, the first home game of the year. Now moving on to a little bit of a more general topic here. Vanderbilt plays in the SEC East, and as we know, the SEC East is notoriously not a great division this year, guys. They have a lot of questionable teams. I don't think there's a single team in the division without major question marks on their team. And if it seems like if there's a year that Vanderbilt's going to win the SEC East, it's going to be this one. So my question is simple: can Vanderbilt win the SEC East this year?
So I think they can, kind of in the same way that I think like the Sixers can come out of the East this year. Like they have the talent, they're finally putting it all together, but just it's a matter of can it happen, and it's a matter of consistency. And I think the biggest thing is consistency. They have to be able to play their best week in and week out, because the SEC East, yeah, there's no team that is guaranteed to win it, but there are a lot of good football teams, and you saw that week one pulling out those close games. Vanderbilt has to continue to win each week and show that they can be that team each week, and I think that they can. You saw them beating some of these contenders last year. They beat Tennessee. Vanderbilt has most of its team returning. Tennessee lost its by far two best weapons in Josh Dobbs and Alvin Kamara. You saw Florida had a lot of trouble at quarterback this past week against Michigan. They don't really know who their quarterback is. They still don't know. They might not figure that out for a while. So you talked about the question marks on these teams. Yeah, there's no definitive team that's going to come out of the East, but Vanderbilt just has to show up. They have to do their thing. They have to win each week, and they're going to have to win some of these big games. I mean, we'll talk about which games they can win and which ones they can't later in the show, but it's really going to be a matter of can you win on the road, can you beat some of these teams, especially these SEC East teams that you're going to be contending with. Those are the big games if you want to come out of the SEC East. So the talent is there. I don't know if they'll be able to put together, but I give them a chance, and I think it is a possibility.
Yeah, for me, when you're thinking about can Vandy win the SEC East, I want to look at it from like an analytic standpoint. Like, what is Vandy's magic number? How many wins do they have to get for them to win the SEC East? And you look at the SEC East last year, Florida won it with 6-2 record in conference. And you look at Vandy's schedule, and you see Bama there, tough game. So if you put that game aside, every other game is winnable. And that's when you almost come back to Derek Mason's mentality, not getting ahead of yourself, not trying to think about the whole East this season, but taking it on a week-by-week basis. And when you look at a lot of these games and a lot of these teams, Vandy matches up pretty well with them. Like you look at a team like Georgia, no receivers, but a really, really strong run game and one of the best backs in the nation. If Vandy's defense plays like they did against MTSU with that sense of urgency and that sense of pressure, that's a good matchup for them. And they have those areas against each team each week. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they do it go forward. And a big takeaway that I think that we should look at from this past weekend was how competitive and how gritty each SEC team was. I mean, they all pulled out really close games. And what I think that means is that as far as them playing each other, a lot of teams are going to be swapping wins. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and there's not going to be that one team that can just run away with the conference. And when you look at it like that, and if Vandy has consistency, which is something that they haven't had in a while, but something they're striving for with this new mentality, if they have that consistency, you can see them pulling out of this horse race.
I absolutely agree. I think anything can happen, really. It's any given Saturday, something can happen in college football. But yeah, other than that Alabama game, there really isn't any game on the schedule or any games on the schedule, especially against the East, that you're like, oh, that they really are out of this game completely. So, I mean, no one's saying that Vanderbilt is by any means the best team in the SEC East. I think it's more of a testament to the fact that the rest of the division is so iffy. So, I mean, if Vanderbilt were in the SEC West, they would not be in this position at all. We're in agreement on that. So it would be interesting to see how the schedule shapes out from there. Going on to our final topic here, we kind of touched on it in our SEC East discussion here. Vanderbilt playing a tough schedule this year, has some great teams on the docket like Georgia, like Alabama, like Florida. So, I mean, if you're looking at the games, what is the least winnable game for the Commodores? And is there a game that is probably one of the more winnable ones? Or are there any that really stand out to you on the schedule?
So when you're talking about Vandy and most winnable and least winnable, It's always a little bit of a game and a guessing game, and like you're going to Vegas, because last year when you're looking at the Commodore schedule, there's a lot of winnable games that they lost, and a lot of games that they really shouldn't have competed in that they played in really well. And it's almost like is Vanderbilt playing up to the level of competition and down to the level of competition question? But when you're looking at the schedule this year, least winnable has to be Bama. I mean, coming into the season as the #1 favorites, and that's just a tough game for Vandy. And I expect them to compete well, I do, but that's just always going to be tough. When you're looking at most winnable, there's a really, really good stretch of home games, which is going to be Western Kentucky, Kentucky, and Mizzou. Back-to-back-to-back at home, going to be really good for team morale going into the final game against UT on the road. And again, every single game, you see them match up well with the other team in some facet. So I think every game they have a shot, but it's always hard to say with this team.
Yeah, and you spoke to it, most winnable and least winnable. Really, last year when you looked at the schedule, if you picked the games you thought they'd win and the games you thought they'd lose, you'd probably be wrong almost all of the time. I mean, that's just the way they played. It's that level of inconsistency, but also being able to step up to the challenge. And I see a little bit of that this year. I think Alabama, of course, the least winnable game. I don't know if Alabama will lose a game all year, let alone to Vanderbilt. So that's obviously the least winnable. But when you look at some other games, I think the other two toughest games this year are going to be at South Carolina and at Florida. I think those are two teams you saw them lose to at home last year, and they really struggled on the road last year. They dropped 4 of 6, and those were the games that weren't really that close. The 2-score games, the 31-point blowout against Georgia Tech in Atlanta. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a struggle on the road. And looking at week 1, South Carolina looks excellent. They have their quarterback in Jake Bentley. That offense looked better than I've seen it in a while. So those are going to be the two tough games. Can they go on the road and upset a South Carolina or Florida team? Those are, I think, the games that are least winnable. And when you look at most winnable, yeah, that stretch is an extremely winnable stretch for them. You have to believe that if they want to make a bowl game or do better, they're going to have to win probably all 3 of those games in a row. But another winnable game is, I think, Georgia and Kansas State. I think those are 2 winnable games, and that's surprising because those teams are top 20 teams in the rankings right now. But when you look at it, Vanderbilt won't be picked apart by quarterback play in those 2 games. And I think that's something that they would struggle with, but Georgia has a quarterback controversy if Jacob Eason comes back because Jake Fromm is such a great talent, but he's a freshman. He's a young quarterback. Vanderbilt brings pressure on the quarterback, and that's tough for a freshman to face. And the other quarterback is Jesse Ertz, and he's a senior, but he really has no experience in that Kansas State offense. He played some of last year, threw 9 touchdowns, but he's not a quarterback that you're afraid of when Kansas State comes to town. So they're predominantly running football teams. Vanderbilt's shown that they can stop the run well. They match up with both those teams, and they'll probably have momentum going into that Kansas State game, assuming they can beat Alabama A&M this week. So it's really about momentum, those wins at home, and hopefully you can get some on the road.
It feels like essentially 6 wins should be the expectation for Vanderbilt this season, given their schedule, given how they started the season, their first 1-0 start since 2011. What do you think is your kind of best case scenario for Vanderbilt in terms of win total? Because it feels like 6 wins should be a given for this team already, which is something you haven't been able to say in a long time.
Best case scenario, I'd say if you take the loss against Alabama and you win a lot of the toss-up games, I can see them getting out of the season with 2-3 losses.
Yeah, I agree. I think 9 wins is the best case scenario. And 9 wins is a lot of wins. I mean, 9 wins would probably win the SEC East. But when you look up and down the schedule, it's really very possible that 9 wins happens. If they lose to Alabama and let's say they lose South Carolina and Florida, they can beat all those other teams on the schedule. They're teams that they have either beaten recently or teams that they'll probably be favored against. So you have to believe they can win those games. And best case scenario, 9 wins, they might have a date with Alabama.
Exactly, a date with Alabama in Atlanta, a rematch to probably get shellacked by 30 points would be my guess for that game. With that, that'll just about do it for this week's edition of VU Sports Wire. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. For Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram, I'm Cutler Klein saying so long, and we will see you next time.